learned how many of you were at the dinner last night? So you know whom you speak, and you know his reputation. For those of you who are interested in learning more about him and the writing that he's done, which is extensive, the Tikkun organization and the Network of Spiritual Progressives, if you just go to either of those websites, you'll find a wealth of material of the specific kinds of positions that he's developed and his organization's developed to fight questions about terrorism and multinationalism. So without further ado, I'm just going to bring on Michael. Can you help us with this, Dan? I'm not sure what's
While we're doing that, can everybody stand for a second? And so I'd like to start with a little singing. And I hope some of you know this song, and it's close to some of the things here. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Study war no more. I ain't gonna 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 study war no more. This time, as if you believe it. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Study war no more. I ain't gonna 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 study war no more. One last time, this time with your arms around people as close to around you. You know, around you. That way to someone, okay? Okay. You haven't been enough touchy-feely stuff going on here. I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside. Study war no more. I ain't gonna 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 study war no more. Hey, I passed around the sheet last night. It's for people who want to hear more about our activities. If you haven't signed it, just pass it around again. If anybody here wants to sign it, hasn't signed it yet? And anybody? Okay, well, pass it to that table, please. I have, unfortunately, a lot more to say than I have time to say. So I'm going to just hop into, one other thing. We have, I'm the editor of this magazine called Tikkun. Tikkun is a Hebrew word, means to heal, repair, and transform the world. Tikkun, T-I-K-K-U-N. Would one of you take this and give a copy to each table? Okay? So that you can look at it. When you join the Network of Spiritual Progressives, which is the organization that I'm the director of, I'm not the director, I'm the chair. Okay. At the $50 level or above, you get a free subscription to Tikkun. So, and if you're going to join, and you're sure of it, then you can take one of these home for free. Okay, so now on to this topic. What's the topic again? Like that. Okay, that's the topic. So the first thing I want to say is, look, there's been, in order to understand the contemporary moments of American history, you have to understand that there's been a struggle going on for the past 10,000 years, ever since the emergence of class societies and patriarchy, between two fundamentally different worldviews. About what it is to be a human being. And the one worldview says it's like this: we are thrown into this world by ourselves, and when we come to consciousness, we see, at least as we start to grow up, we begin to realize that we're in a world in which people are seeking to maximize their own advantage without regard to the consequences for others. And that in so doing, they will learn, and they have learned, the techniques of manipulation and getting power over others. And if you want to survive in this world, and certainly if you want to thrive in this world, you've got to learn those techniques as well. You've got to learn how to manipulate other people. You've got to learn how to get power over other people. You've got to learn how to dominate other people. And if you don't, they will manipulate and dominate you. So wherever you end up will be in part a consequence of how successful you are at learning these techniques and this way of being and building power over others. In this world, this is a worldview that I call a worldview of domination or a worldview of fear of others, because it's a struggle of all against all. Thomas Hobbes wrote about this in his book Leviathan. You get, in this worldview, in order to achieve security for your family, for your community, for your country, if you want homeland security, the way to achieve it is through domination and power over other people. And if you don't achieve it, then other people, other communities, or other entities or other states will get that power over you. So it's a worldview of domination and a worldview of fear. And it has been extremely popular throughout ever since class societies emerged, because class societies are based on this reality of this struggle of all against all, and of differentials of power and differentials of money as a result of that differentials of power. So you've heard of this one? Okay, ever heard of these ideas put forward? Yeah, because this is the dominant worldview that you'll hear in politics today. So this is a major worldview that almost everybody on the planet has heard, because those who have power have in part justified their power by saying, hey, this is just the way the world is. And if you want to, if you want to survive in it, you've got to learn how to do this as well as we have. Now, on the other hand, there's a different worldview that says something like this. Most of us, probably even most of the people in this room, didn't come into the world all by ourselves. Most of us came into the world through a mother. And a mother, or it could have been a mothering other, this doesn't have to be a biological mother, gave you love, kindness, and generosity in the first few years of your life. She, or it might have been a he even, who took care of you, in those first few years gave you the kind of nurturance and support that made it possible for you to thrive. There were psychological studies done in the 20th century around what happens when you don't get that, in which little infants literally died. They called it failure to thrive. Those experiments, that failure to thrive without that. And from that experience, now your mother, or the mother, but let's say your mother, did not have a reasonable expectation of a good return on her investment of time and energy in you. So she wasn't doing it because she thought she would get something. She was giving to give rather than giving to get. She was giving to give rather than giving to get. She gave that to you. And from that experience derives another worldview. and is the core of the spiritual traditions and of almost all the religions that have survived through the past 10,000 years and come down to our time. Almost all of them have this alternative worldview. This alternative worldview says that your success, your ability to thrive in the world is dependent in part on the degree to which you can build caring relationships with other people and be generous to them, to show them that you care about them, and they will, at least in the long run, they will reciprocate with caring relationships towards you. So this other worldview became the foundation of spiritual and religious traditions that said they had a different view of how the world is. Now, over the course of time, trying to thrive or survive in class-dominated societies where the power was in the hands of those who held the first worldview, the worldview of fear and domination, as opposed to the worldview of caring and love and generosity, more and more people in the religious world, including leaders of the religious world, started to bring in the ideology of, let's call it what I call in my book, the right hand of God. The book is called the left hand of God. So more and more people brought in that worldview into the religious communities so that it no longer became so purely about love and generosity and kindness. But nevertheless, the core vision there was one that was based on this alternative worldview. Now, most people on the planet have heard both worldviews. And most of us have heard both of these worldviews. And most people are on a continuum someplace between the worldview of fear, of domination and control, and the worldview of love, kindness, or generosity. And where exactly we are on this continuum is never fixed, because we have both views in our head, both voices are in the heads of most people on the planet. And so where we are at any given moment shifts according to a number of factors. Number one, it is affected by how much in growing up you met other kids who were coming from the standpoint of having had very nurturing parents who gave support and care to you, or how much they've had domination and power over parents. And by the way, domination and power over parents are not necessarily parents who didn't like their kids. On the contrary, they were parents who had absorbed the worldview of domination and power enough to say, I've got to toughen up my kid from the earliest parts because this is the way the real world is, and I want to protect my kid, and the only way I can protect her or him is to get her or him to know how to deal with the toughness of this world by recognizing how much people are going to hurt you or dominate you or control you unless you learn how to protect yourself and get power over other people. See what I'm saying? So it doesn't mean that these parents are not bad people who are doing this. They're people who are looking at the world through this framework of the power domination worldview and then saying, okay, I need to protect my child by that, and so I have to give them more and more of the skills of knowing how to be tough, knowing how to get that power over other people, how to protect yourself and so forth. So that's one of the factors. And then the second factor where you are in this continuum is when you were an adult, how many relationships did you have with people who saw you primarily from the standpoint of what they could get from you, as opposed to how many actually saw you as fundamentally valuable just for who you are and gave you caring and love and responded to your human essence. Almost everybody here has probably had experiences of both sorts, but where you are exactly on this continuum is affected by how many of those relationships were more about what they could get from you rather than from what they could see you as fundamentally valuable and deserving of love and kindness. A third factor is what worldviews were you exposed to? Because there are worldviews that tend to give much more emphasis to domination and control, and many of them are taught as supposedly social science or even psychology in universities, worldviews that ontologize, that is, put into the fundamental nature of the universe, theories about what human beings are that are based in some variant of hey, we're all selfish, looking out for ourselves, seeking domination and control. So you get this at every level of social sciences and psychology. The notion of the selfish gene or the natural attitude towards power and domination and control. This is what worldviews that you've heard that might have given you some sense of the possibility of a world based on love and kindness and generosity. Those don't tend to get many professors tenure in the universities these days, but there are some, in this wonderful university that Ms. Wright was speaking about last night that many of you are connected to. Obviously, as one such university, there are alternative places, but mostly universities are dominated by departments where many more people coming from the right-hand view or the domination view are there. And similarly, if you read columnists in the newspapers, you'll hear far more of the voices of what they call realism, that they insist that this is the realistic way of understanding the world, and the other is the unrealistic way of understanding the world. It's part of the way that they get to argue for their points. But most people are on, as I say, a continuum someplace between these two, and these are some of the factors of where they are. And then there's also the factor of where social energy is moving, because when social energy moves more towards fear, then the voices that we've heard about fear and domination and control tend to come to the fore inside of us. So 9/11 was a perfect example of that, of when that horrible thing happened. Many of the voices that had been instilled in us at earlier times came to the fore, and more people saw that, maybe that's the real way the world is. It's something where we need power and control and domination and hurting evil people. There are so many of those supposedly evil people around. And then, on the other hand, social energy is not static. So as the subsequent war that was started supposedly in the name of 9/11, but had nothing to do with 9/11 in Iraq, people started to get more and more upset about that war, and more people were open to a different voice, and Obama comes along and says, no, we can build a world based on hope and real change, and so social energy started to move more towards that possibility. Then after he got into office and failed to come through with many of the promises that he had raised, there were a lot of disillusionment, and people started to move back away from that. So after those first 2 years in office, lots and lots of people disappointed and not feeling that anything really was going to happen. The social energy moves away from that. So social energy is constantly fluid, and it has a tremendous impact on what parts of ourselves we're willing to take seriously, or where it goes. So what I'm saying to you, though, is that one thing that you can take away from this conversation, and don't remember anything else I'm about to say, is always look at social reality through this framework. Always ask yourself that whenever you hear a public speaker, whenever you read a novel, see a movie, a television show, listen to a political leader, listen to a religious leader, a spiritual leader, always ask yourself, after you've heard their rap or seen their movie or read their novel or whatever, would this novel, with this television show, with this movie, with this speaker, with this politician, tend to move the more energy more in the direction of hope or more in the direction of fear, more in the direction of domination or more in the direction of evoking our loving capacities. And this would be a framework which, if you apply it, will really help clarify. And by the way, although I call this the right hand of God and the left hand of God, this does not map in a one-to-one way onto left and right in politics. Because there are some people on the right who use love or caring as the way to advance their ideas, and there are some people on the left who use fear as a way of advancing their ideas. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't automatically map in left and right on politics. Get what I'm saying? Okay. So now I want to switch away. This is a little framework to have in the back of your mind. I want to switch away from that and tell you a little bit about the research that I was doing after having been a social change activist in the 60s and having ended up in a federal penitentiary, declared by J. Edgar Hoover to be one of the most dangerous criminals in America for activity that was nothing more than speech. I went to graduate school to get a second PhD in clinical psychology and then created an organization called the Institute for Labor and Mental Health. And what I was interested in is trying to understand the psychodynamics of American society, and in particular in the research that I did for NIMH, although they didn't know that that's what they were funding. I was, a lot of my energy in the funding that I was doing was directed towards a particular question. And the question was, why is it that people whose economic interests are being served by liberal and progressive politics are moving to the right politically? What is going on here? Now, the question itself was based on an assumption that I later came to realize was a deeply mistaken assumption, namely that people would necessarily go with their economic interests, and their economic interests would be determinative of where they would be in politics. But it took me quite a while to understand that, to learn that, and realize that the question was itself came from a mistaken worldview. But as we proceeded with this study, which had in its first wave about 400 people that we were running groups for, half of them part of the labor movement, half of them not part of the labor movement, all of them middle-income working people, and many of them moving to the right politically. What we discovered was we listened to people's stories, and they told us about their experience in the world of work, because the official focus of this study was on stress at work and stress in family life. And as we listened to their stories, we learned more and more about what it is to be working class in this society and the experience. And what we learned is this, that most people spend most of their waking hours in the world of work, most people from the ages of, let's say, 20 to 65, spend most of their waking hours in the world of work and travel to and from the world of work. And so the experience that they have in that setting has a massive impact on the few hours that they're awake other than in the world of work. And in the world of work, they quickly learn that they are valued there to the extent that they can contribute to, in the private sector, which is where most people are employed, in the private sector to the degree to which they can be seen as contributing to the bottom line of money and power for those who run the institutions or those who control the institutions. And so your value is perceived that way, as what, am I or is my little work unit here going to contribute to the bottom line? And the bottom line is how much money and power this institution can generate. In the public sector, the nonprofit sector, it also has to do with how much you can contribute to the egos of the people at the top. But for most people, it's in this world of work where it's the money and power and not so much the ego. Although in the private sector, in the public sector or the nonprofit sector also, money plays a big role for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to try and go into right now. So people learn that this is how they are seen, this is how they're going to be judged. And they learn something else very quickly, or at least they learn it over the course of a few years in the workplace, certainly 10, 20 years in the workplace. They learn that there aren't a lot of people there who are coming to that workplace worrying about you and protecting you and wondering about your well-being. most people in the world of work are there to advance their own interests. At least that's how they are perceived by others. And as a result, they realize that they had better pay attention to their own self-interest. And so what they come away from every day in the world of work, more and more and more over the course of the time of their working life, is the experience of being alone in a context in which their value is how much they can contribute to the bottom line, and a sense that everybody else is out for themselves. Now, this is something that they then bring home into the rest of their lives. They bring home the notion that people are looking out to maximize their own money. They're looking out for number one. And one of the bestsellers of the 80s, I think, was called Looking Out for Number One. Another bestseller was called Winning Through Intimidation. But it's all about how do you advance your own interests in the best possible way in this world in which everybody is looking to advance their own interests. And of course, the owners of those corporations are shaping that reality, and not because they're bad people, but because this is the nature of the capitalist system, that if you don't do that, some other firm that's competing with you will do a better job, and eventually they will get more of the investment money that they need than you will if you're not showing that you can enhance the money of the people who invest in those corporations. So it's not, in no way am I suggesting that people who are running the corporations are evil people, saying this is the nature of the system as a whole, and the system has this consequence. Now, one of the things that, and so as people told us about this, they also then reported that their personal lives, and that they were seeing the impact of all this on the people around them. Because when they started to talk about their friendships, they said, oh, our friendships are not as strong as they used to be. Over the course of 10, 20, 30 years in the workplace, they reported that people don't seem to have an ethos of solidarity. That my friends look at me more in terms of, an exchange relationship. I'm there for them as long as they can be there for me, and I can get an equal exchange of time, energy, and concern about me. And you might say, well, what's wrong about that? Well, the problem is that as people get older or as people get sicker, it turns out that their friends are no longer there for them so much because, or at least this is what they're reporting, that people sort of drift away as they get older or as they get sicker and are not able to give back an equal amount of energy and time that they need from their friends. And so what they reported is that friendships feel a little thinner than they used to remember them to be. Now maybe many of us in the room were not, don't even remember those days when friendships were thicker, but the people that we were working with did. And so there was this decline in solidarity. Similarly, and this then gets translated also into loving relationships, because more and more people were reporting to us that what they experienced around them was people entering into loving relationships with this same consciousness of, okay, I'm looking for what's in my own best interest. So first there's the marketplace of relationships for people in their 20s and 30s, in which you go through one after another, tasting all the products as though it were a supermarket in which you're tasting the various products on the supermarket shelf, until finally you find somebody that you think you can settle down with. But that, essentially seeing how can I get my needs best met from other people. And then eventually people will make a commitment to somebody, but very often unconsciously, although sometimes consciously people make lists about qualities they're looking for in other people, but But most people don't do that consciously, but they enter into these relationships with the marketplace consciousness that they've been learning all day in the world of work, and by the way, I should mention, and massively reinforced by the media, in which almost every television show, certainly every sitcom, is about who can get power over who. Whether that power is money, or whether that power is sex, or whether that power is some way of being on top. And by the way, this is not just for adults. If you look at the shows for kids, for 4 or 5-year-olds, you'll see that the same kind of dynamic is being played out in the little animal shows, in which animal is being on top, and which one animal has more power, which one can outsmart the other one, and so forth. There's this endless competition that is being taught to everybody as the nature of the world, including the nature of the animal world. And so when people do make these commitments, they often do it on the basis of a conscious or unconscious sense of, amongst the people who are likely to fall for me in the short run, who is going to satisfy more of my needs than anyone else? And if you satisfy more of my needs than anyone else, I'm making a commitment to you. Now you might say, again, what's wrong with that? Actually, if you're thinking that your partner is also a rational maximizer of self-interest, what you've learned all day in the world of work, and what everybody who's smart is doing, supposedly, being a rational maximizer of self-interest, then of course you're expecting your partner to do the same thing. So what's so bad about that? Well, the problem is that in relationships, when you enter into those relationships with that as sort of unconscious background, relationships become more and more unstable. So what we see over the course of the 20th century is the divorce rate suddenly going up and up and up and up. And why? Because the quality of people is less? No. The reason is that more and more people, well, first of all, there's tremendous instability in family life, but more and more people are saying to themselves, well, I might have met this other person who I think, whether it's a rational assessment or not is another question, might satisfy more of my needs. And as a rational maximizer of self-interest, it would be ridiculous for me to stay in this marriage or in this relationship if this other person can satisfy more of my needs than you can, partner. So, of course, I'm going to, as a rational maximizer of self-interest, leave you and go to the next one. So hence a tremendous upsurge of divorce in families, so that by the last 2 decades of the 20th century, the divorce rate was about 50% of all first marriages ended in divorce. But the insecurity that generated was way more than that, because most people didn't know whether they were part of the 50% that was going to stay together or the 50% that was going to break up. They could see all around them this was happening, and so tremendous insecurity in families, because family life felt extremely insecure, because you never knew whether your partner was going to end up finding somebody that she or he thought would provide more of their needs than you could. And then, of course, would leave. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. First of all, I've been divorced, and secondly, I'm not making any kinds of moral judgments here. I'm saying that there is a dynamic which has created tremendous insecurity. And there's almost no way that people growing up in this society can end up thinking a different way about other human beings, except through the framework that is massively shaped by the capitalist marketplace and by the dynamics therein. Just to point out as an aside, okay, for those who think, well, wait a second, we all shape our own realities here, which is one of the things that I want to get to in a second. But that notion, okay, that we all shape our own realities here is a mantra, the major mantra of capitalist ideology. Because what it says to you, and says to most people, is the following: where you end up in your life, whether it be in your economic life or in your personal life, is a reflection of who you fundamentally are. if you were more together, you would, if you were smarter, if you would work harder, and the stories are, you can fill them in a whole variety of ways, but if you were something, your life would be so much better, or the way that you want it to be, if you had been more together as a person. So this mantra of you create your own reality is a mantra which then leads to another dimension of the suffering that people face living in a society that is based in these kinds of dynamics. And that suffering is a tremendous internalization of self-blame, in which people feel terrible about themselves, so terrible about themselves that they then end up internalizing the self-blaming, internalizing the view that, yes, we can create any reality we want, and so the reality I'm in is the one that I created because of who I am as a person, my own particular screw-ups, and therefore I have nobody to blame but myself. Now, just if you step back for a second and ask yourself, oh, really, did you create this economic reality? Okay, there's, in our society right now, 1/10 of 1% of the population owns 80% of the wealth. Okay, if you created that, I'm really angry with you. Okay, if you created it, I'll bet there isn't a person here who created it. Not only didn't you create it, but by yourself, you cannot change it. Okay, you will not be able to change it by yourself. In fact, Bernie had millions of people behind him and still couldn't change it. Okay, it's very, very hard to change. It is not something which any individual can change. These dynamics, they're built into the structure, the economic and political structures of the society that have been inherited over the course of the past 10,000 years and massively reinforced by the institutions that the upper 1% controls. Okay, and now let me say also, because I'm rushing to get all this stuff in, that, by the way, about the situation in the workplace, I'm describing the situation of about 80% of the population. There are about 20% of the population of the top income 20%, where their work is one that provides them with more opportunities to use their creativity, intelligence, and to find some sense of meaning and purpose in what they're doing, some sense that they're contributing. But the other massive thing that's happening for working people is that huge numbers of people, and this is the first major thing that we discovered, was that huge numbers of people in this work situation come away feeling not only that they have not been successful materially, but that they've been wasting their lives in a work world where they cannot see how what they're doing all day long in the world of work has any higher meaning and purpose. And so there is, on the one hand, the self-blaming about having been and ended up there and feeling terrible about themselves, but also a sense of a wasted life, a deep sense of meaninglessness, a sense that they are not able to use their life energies to contribute to some higher good. Now, of course, this astounded our researchers, the research team that I put together, because like most people in the upper middle class and academia, we thought that we had meaning needs, but the majority of working Americans, they only have material needs. Okay, so this is, and I said it's massively reinforced by the ideologies of the society and by the discourse in both political parties, both major political parties. It was, I mentioned last night, it was one of Clinton's major strategists who coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." That's what moves people. Wherever the economy is, that's what will shape how people will vote. Imagine the surprise in 2000 when the economy was booming and yet they didn't end up voting for the hand-picked the vice president who had been part of this economic success. But I had heard this over and over and over again, and so it was startling to us to realize that middle-income, working-class people had the exact same needs that we had. The hunger for meaning and purpose in their lives, and a deep frustration about it being systematically stunted by by the situation that they found themselves in the world of work, in which they could not in any way develop a story about what they were doing that seemed to have any sense of higher meaning or purpose. The purpose in their work world they saw was to maximize the money and power of the people who were at the top of the hierarchy, including the owners of the corporations and their hired guns who were the managers of the corporations. And so there was a tremendous crisis of meaning and purpose in the society. You have that on the one hand, and then you have tremendous insecurity in family life. And I say, hey, so that crisis of meaning and purpose, let's call it, I'm going to call it a spiritual crisis. But there was also this crisis in family life, because as people internalize the ethos of selfishness and materialism, at least to the extent of looking at other people from the framework of what can I get from you, what will you deliver for me, more and more people feeling, first of all, having very insecure families, but also feeling lonely, scared, because even in the relationships that stay together, people are never sure that their partner will not leave them, number one. And number two, they come to feel very alone, even in marriages that are stable. So this, which was really for many of them reporting to us, hey, that's not how it was for my parents. I never saw that before. This is a new phenomenon in American history. Actually, it wasn't so new, but at least it was new for people reporting it, saying, well, this is something really weird that's going on, is that I feel lonely in my marriage. I feel lonely in my primary relationships. Now, what I'm saying to you is it's almost impossible to grow up in this society and not have internalized the ethos of materialism, or at least of looking out for number one, and of looking at other human beings through the framework of what I can get from you. I say almost, because there is another way of looking. And that other way I'm going to call a spiritual way. The spiritual consciousness, whether it's articulated by, it's something like this. It's looking at other human beings and seeing them as fundamentally valuable, as Immanuel Kant put it, as subjects, not as objects. Or as Martin Buber put it, in an I-thou relationship rather than an I-it relationship. Or in the way that other religious people put it, as spiritual beings who deserve to be left in here because they are embodiments of God, or embodiments of the sacred. Whatever the language you want to put on this, it doesn't have to be a religious language. Whatever the language you want to put on it, there is another way of being. There's another way of being in the world. And that other way of being is one that many, many people gravitate to because they are desperate for some place in which a different consciousness, besides the consciousness of the market and what can I get from you or it or them or whatever, is manifested, at least articulated as a value. And that is the world of religion or religious or spiritual consciousness. And so people gravitated to that. So even though in the 20th century, with the triumph of science and rationality, people were saying, oh, religion is on the way out, it turned out that religion had a huge upsurge in the last 30 years of the 20th century and the first 15, 16 years of this century, because more and more people, desperate to find some place in which a different consciousness would be articulated. Now, unfortunately, in that place, the political right had a strong hold, and it presented and has presented to people a way of dealing with the issues, the pain that they are in. Pain that is generated by their living in a society in which meaning is undermined, at least a sense of meaning and purpose for your own life, or your own work, on the one hand, and in which the ethos of selfishness seems to pervade people all around them. Now, how did we hear about this? Well, people were telling us, and they were telling us something that was also striking to us, which was not only that they had this sense of frustration of meaning, but that they actually hated living in a world that was filled with so much selfishness and materialism. But simultaneously, they're telling us how much they hated it, they were also telling us, and there's nothing I can do to change it. That's how it is. That is, people believing deeply that this is the reality of the world, that everybody else feels that way, and that therefore they have to learn how to be that way themselves in order to survive in such a world. Rarely able to articulate even to their friends the core feelings that they have of, on the one hand, a desire for a world that has more meaning, and on the other hand, a feeling of an ability to say, I feel terrible about myself for being such a failure. On the contrary, people rarely say that in their friendships, or so they're reporting to us. Rarely talk about that because they feel that in saying that they will either be, and this is part of working class culture, with a lot of people saying, "What, my friends will think I'm crazy. I'm afraid I'll get locked up if I tell them that I'm really unhappy about this aspect of my life, of a sense of that's too much selfishness." They'll say, "What? Grow up, be an adult. Don't stop being an adolescent. That's how things are." I don't want to expose myself in that way. I don't want to open myself to people about the ways in which I'm deeply self-blaming about my own failures, because all that'll do is convince them that they don't really want to be friends with a failure like me. So millions and millions and millions of people holding these views about themselves, but not being willing to talk about it. By the way, in the incidental study that we did, we also went and talked to people in much higher levels of the society and found that almost everybody has a self-blaming story. I mean, we spoke to college presidents, and their self-blaming was that they were not the Secretary of Education. Okay, I mean, wherever you are in this kind of a society, a lot of people are maintaining self-blaming stories that they then don't share with other people and so forth. But in the world of religion or spirituality, they were being offered that, a way of dealing with this. But in that, many of them gravitated to religions or religious communities or nationalist communities where right-wing views predominated. And what the right-wing views said was like this. There is a spiritual crisis in this society. And so when you're feeling that you have insecurity in your family life, or you're surrounded by selfishness or whatever, and you feel like there's lack of meaning, you're right. And guess what? It's not your fault. The right came forward, it is not your fault. Do not blame yourself. That in itself is the core of the right's psychological power and success in the society. They were telling people to helping people relieve their own self-blaming about these dynamics. Now the sad part is that the way they then said, explain this is, the reason that it's not your fault is because selfishness and materialism is being introduced by some other. And this other is and then wherever you are in the world, this structure of my argument applies almost every place where you have a capitalist society. The other is the demeaned other of your society. In Europe, the same story, the same way of understanding the world became popular in the 1920s and 30s, and it was the Jews who were blamed. The Jews have introduced selfishness. They're just out for themselves. They're looking out to maximize their own interests. They're screwing up. Well, otherwise, we would have this very loving and caring society. Everybody would be here in solidarity. But these others have come into your society and are manipulating it. In the United States, the primary demeaned others throughout our history have been African Americans and Native Americans. But in the past 30 years, that has been expanded greatly as more and more the right was able to say, no, these others also are feminists. Why feminists? Because they're just out for themselves. Those women are looking out for themselves, but they don't care for the rest of us, namely men. Okay, but there were a lot of men around to feel that. Okay, so they don't care about the rest of us. Or they are the immigrants. They are the Mexicans who are coming here. They are the people who are, or they are LGBTQ people. Why lesbians and gays? Well, they're not raising families. Not true, but nevertheless what they were saying. They're not raising families, so they're not making the sacrifices that you're making. So they're just out for themselves. All they care about is having sex. They don't care about building families and doing the work that the rest of us are doing. In the last 10, 15 years, that has now included all liberals or progressives. They're also blamed for this selfishness and materialism. Who it is, and because in any society that is affected by these dynamics, and it's most of the societies where capitalist principles prevail on the whole world, you will find a different demeaned other being the ones, different sets of demeaned others who are being the ones who are blamed. But, so now, understand what I'm saying here. There is a real pain that is not invented by the right. It is actually built into the structure of the societies in which we live. A real pain that is affecting people. They are in deep pain about themselves, about the selfishness that surrounds them, the insecurity they have in their relationships, their failure in the world of work, at least self-perceived failure, the blaming of themselves for all of this, real pain, and on the other hand, a strategy to deal with that pain, which is deeply screwed up. I'm over time? What time is it? I thought I had till 11 populates.
It's quarter after.
Quarter of 11? Okay, I have 15 more minutes.
No, quarter after.
11:15.
Okay, you told me I had an hour to speak, and I'm going to take it. I came through 3,000 miles, I'm going to take my time. Okay, so, I have tremendous respect for you, Paul, and great appreciation for what you've done here, and still I want to tell this story. Okay, so now, we went, so understand what I'm saying, right? The structure, the pain is real, the strategy to deal with that pain is screwed up. The strategy is to blame some others and put your energy or negativity towards those others. And you would think that this is the perfect situation for liberals and progressives to make themselves popular in the society, because what they would come forward to do is to say, well, you see, actually, the structures of capitalist society are the problem here, and the dominant assumptions of capitalist society are the problem, and that's where all this is coming from. But unfortunately, instead, what the liberals and progressives do, they turn to these movements and they say the people are essentialist, racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, or stupid. That's why they're not voting for us, that's why they're not rallying around us, etc. And so this then plays into, gives the right-wingers a powerful weapon, because what they respond by saying is, you see, these leftists, these liberals, these progressives, they have contempt for you. They have contempt for you. They don't respect you. They are putting down the very things that you're finding meaning, namely, and now we come to another theme that I don't have time to lay out a full reason for, which is that in the liberal and progressive world, there is a deep religiophobia. A deep religiophobia, a deep fear of religion. And that fear is based in part on people growing up in religious communities that were in fact oppressive in various ways, or racist or sexist or so forth. But people, having had that experience, generalized to all religion, not just to the particular branch of religion that they encountered. They failed to notice all of the progressive voices in religion. They even failed to notice that the most successful social change movement of the 20th century, namely the Civil Rights Movement, was built on the religious consciousness of the black churches and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who was starting each of his marches with prayer services and so forth. But in the liberal and progressive world, there is this fear of religion and of any form of spirituality as being somehow a slippery slope towards reaction. And by the way, that's why we have here, let's say, 200 people in this conference as opposed to 20,000 people in this conference. Because the hunger for meaning and purpose should be something that would be widespread amongst our colleagues and amongst everybody in the society, but it isn't, because meaning itself is seen as another one of those areas in which there's a slippery slope towards religion to spirituality to religion, and the liberal and progressive world doesn't want to hear about it. And they mistake the strategy that people have adopted and see that as their essence rather than the pain that led people to that strategy. You get what I'm saying? So here then is the task that faces those of us who are spiritual progressives. So we created an organization called the Network of Spiritual Progressives to try to address this, and we created Tikkun magazine as a way to do that as well. And in Tikkun and in the Network of Spiritual Progressives, we're trying to put forward a different worldview and a different kind of progressive politics. Now, the core of this different worldview and different politics is this. It is the view, it says that our central demand is we want a new bottom line in this society. A new bottom line. The old bottom line says that every institution or social practice, corporations, government policies should be judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize money and power. We say no. The new bottom line is that every institution, every corporation, every government policy, our educational system, our legal system, our healthcare system, the whole economy should be judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that it maximizes our capacities, our human capacities, to be loving and caring, kind and generous, capable of responding to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred or as fundamentally valuable, sensitive to the needs of the environment, and capable of responding to the earth and the universe as a whole with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of all that is. That's the new bottom line. And so part of our strategy, and here's why I flew 3,000 miles, that's why I couldn't just give up right now, is that we want you to be members of this network and help us getting other people to do the following. In their work world or in their personal life, you as people who have, many of you interacting in your work world, with other people, not lone wolves, that you help them visualize for themselves what it would look like in their lives if there were this new bottom line. Now, why is this visualization so important? Because most people will respond, okay, wait, I forgot to mention a key rule for this process. The rule is, okay, we want you to visualize what it would look like in your life, in your work world, in the school that your kids go to or your grandchildren go to, in the media, in the communities that you're part of. What would it look like if this new bottom line was really operating? Okay, and the rule is this. You can't let into that discussion or visualization the reality police. The reality police are all the voices in your head that are telling you that it'll never happen. And because it'll never happen, there's no point in even thinking in this direction of what a different world would look like. And what our contention is that just as the women's movement, through creating small groups in which women began to visualize what would their life look like if they weren't enmeshed in sexist relationships, if they weren't dealing with sexism in the workplace and in their families and in every other place that they looked at in the media and so forth, what would it look like? And that vision gave people a tremendous amount of power to move forward. Now we have tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of social change groups in this society, each one focused on a particular problem. But I always like to say that Martin Luther King Jr. did not become the icon of social change in this society by giving a speech to hundreds of thousands of people in 1963 at the Washington Monument that said, "I have a complaint." The liberal and progressive movement has a zillion complaints and they're all right. But what they don't have is a unifying worldview of what they want, of the positive vision of the world that they want. And so we are trying in our network of spiritual progressives to say, here is what people would unify all of us. So that if you're working on fracking, or if you're working on hunger, or if you're working on housing, if you're working on human rights, if you're working on anti-war, whatever you're working on, you should also simultaneously be saying, and we want a new bottom line. in which institutions and social practices are judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness, and generosity, ethical and environmental sensitivity, and enhance our capacities to see other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to respond to the okay, well, it's a 10-second soundbite. Okay, so we want people to say that and to encourage people to talk that way, and so not to give up their own specific special struggles or any aspect of your life, but to add that explicitly to what you're doing, to tell your clients, this is what I'm about. Okay? That doesn't mean that I'm going to try to convince you should be about it, but I want you to know that this is what I'm about. I stand for this. This is what my practice is about. This is what I really want in the world. I want this new bottom line. And so I want to urge you to join our network of spiritual progressives. That's spiritualprogressives.org. Go there, spiritualprogressives.org/join. Join us. Become part of this. Help us build this movement. Now, if you go to our website there, you'll also see that we have some specific struggles taken from this to show how this might play out in daily life, and I'll just mention two. One is that we're proposing a major shift in the discourse about how you get homeland security. We're saying instead of homeland security through domination, we want homeland security through generosity. Okay, for 10,000 years people have been trying to make war as the way to get homeland security, and guess what? It hasn't worked. It hasn't produced a safe world for anybody. And so when you see a candidate like Trump come and gets the success, he's getting the success that he's gotten. I mean, he may not win, that would be very good. But even if he doesn't win, if he loses in a landslide, the movements and the consciousness that have produced him will still be there in the next 4, 8, 12, into the future. Because the fundamental core problems in people's lives have not been addressed by Hillary Clinton or by the liberal or progressive forces or by the left, by Bernie or Bernie Sanders either. They aren't addressed. So we need to have a movement that can go to this level of depth to address what it is that people are really hurting and to articulate a different vision. And so that's what we're doing. So Homeland Security, how? Well, we propose a global Marshall Plan, a domestic and global Marshall Plan, to dedicate 1 to 2% of our own country's gross domestic product and the gross domestic product of the other major countries that are now pouring their monies into NATO and other various military alliances, instead to pour it into a global Marshall Plan to once and for all eliminate, not ameliorate, but eliminate global poverty, homelessness, hunger, inadequate education, inadequate health care. 20 years of such a global Marshall Plan would be enough to do that. Would be enough to eliminate global poverty entirely. And secondly, we're advocating for the ESRA, an Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment, which would, number one, require that all public elections be publicly financed and all of the money disallowed. Not from individuals, not from corporations, not from political parties, only publicly financed. But number two, that major corporations with incomes of about $50 million a year, have to get a new corporate charter once every 5 years, and they can only get it if they can prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility to a jury of ordinary citizens who would hear testimony from people all around the world who are affected by that corporation's hiring policies, its the products or services it produces, the kind of advertising it does, and other ways that it impacts on people's lives. Well, these are two specifics. You don't have to agree with the specifics, but we have many other specifics, and you can join us in helping to plan all this out. But critical that I'm appealing to you is join us. Begin to talk about a new bottom line because it will link you to lots of other people and help them see that actually that's what they want also. Because when you get right down to it, you talk about this new bottom line with your friends, most of them will say, the reality people come up, they'll say, it'll never happen. Okay, but do you want it? Well, yeah, and 9 out of 10 of your friends will say, yeah, I would like it, it just won't happen. Your 10th friend will say, no, I don't, I think it's crazy. Okay, even your 10th friend, however, after a while will come back and say, I do want it, but it'll never happen. It'll never happen because we keep on saying to each other that it won't happen. You can be agents of transformation by stopping that discourse, by saying, yes, it will, because a lot of us really want a different kind of world. So I'm going to end now and just say, thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and please join us As I say, if you join at the $50 level or more, you get the subscription to become